Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kindred, a celebration of African American fiction, part of Gwinnett County Public Library's Black History Month programming. My name is Mark. I'm a librarian here at the Gwinnett County Public Library. Start out with a quote from one of the most revered African American authors of the 20th century, James Baldwin. He was a novelist, poet, and activist. For while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard. There isn't any other tale to tell. It's the only light we've got in all this darkness. So what is considered African American fiction? Here's a look at some titles you may or may not have heard of. It's work that includes the diversity and breadth of African American writers' voices and stories. For the purpose of this presentation, African American fiction is defined as fiction written specifically by Black writers and featuring Black characters. African American in this case may be a little misleading because many of these great works are written by writers not just of African descent, but are also from the United States, the Caribbean, Haiti, the West Indies, Europe, Middle East, and Jamaica. The earliest forms of fiction in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century were thought to be folklore, novels, and the slave narrative. In many parts of the country, especially in the South, it was illegal for slaves and other blacks to learn how to read and write. Restrictions that compelled African American writers to compensate with oral forms of communication, such as storytelling, folklore, and oral history. As quoted down here by Zora Neale Hurston, folklore is the boiled down juice of human living. Were able to break through and get their stories published. Stories that examine the conditions of Black lives, including enslavement, migration, identity, and affirmation. On the left, you see Clotel, the President's Daughter. This was by William Wells Brown, and it is considered to be the first novel ever published by an African American. It was published in 1853. Over here on the right, you see Our Nig, Sketches from the Life of a Free Black, 1859. This is a novel by Harriet E. Wilson about the heartbreak of slavery and racism, and it is a direct challenge to the flowery portrait of slavery found in Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book by Harriet Beecher Stowe, a white woman. The slave narrative, mostly autobiographical, but always categorized in fiction as well, the slave narrative added an essential dimension to African American stories. One in particular right here in the middle, The Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs, one of the first comprehensive slave narratives written by a woman, depicting the struggles of female slaves seeking to protect their roles as women and mothers. So we'll start out with the best of the best. These are going to be 10 or 11 titles that maybe you know, maybe you don't know, maybe you love, maybe you don't, or maybe you've never heard of them. But they really belong on this list. This is based on the general consensus of critics and scholars, historians, and everyday readers. These specific books are consistently cited as the best in African American fiction. They are monumental contributions to world literature. And now I know it would please no one if I tried to put this subjective list in any kind of numerical order. Please note, all these books are listed alphabetically by author. Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, 1953, about a young man's religious upbringing in Harlem. Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, a nameless protagonist's odyssey from the deep south to the streets of Harlem. The autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, a remarkable story of a heroine's journey from slavery to her participation in the civil rights struggle. Our Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, 1937, about a fair-skinned black woman's trials with selfhood, marriage, and poverty. Passing by Nella Larson, 1929. Set in 1920s Harlem, a black woman learns that a former childhood friend is passing as white. Beloved by Toni Morrison, 1987. Any number of Toni Morrison's books could have appeared on this list. I think the book most critics and readers point to as her best is Beloved, about a former slave and her family who are haunted by the past and the painful memory of her dead baby. Cain by Jean Toomer, 1923. Vignettes about the origins and experiences of African Americans in the United States. The very popular The Color Purple by Alice Walker, about the lives of African American women in early 20th century rural Georgia, told through a series of letters spanning over 20 years. Native Son by Richard Wright. This was the story of a young black man in 1930s Chicago who in a panic accidentally kills a white woman. And one that could not be excluded in this presentation is called The 20th Century Cycle, written between 1982 and 2005 by the playwright August Wilson. Wilson's work includes a series of 10 plays, each one set in a different decade and depicting aspects of the African American experience in the 20th century. One of his major themes is always about the tension between characters who want to hold on to their African heritage and legacy and those who want to break away from it. Two of these plays won the Pulitzer Prize, Fences and The Piano Lesson, and a few of them have been made into movies, TV movies and big screen movies, including from last year the very popular Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. As August Wilson has been quoted as saying, there is no idea in the world that is not contained by a black life. I could write forever about the black experience in America. The rest of the best. We get to cast a wider net here and talk about a lot more of the books you may know. These popular favorites have been beloved by readers of generations, and they are still popular from the day they were published to now. And libraries have always had to keep them stacking on the shelves so that people can come and check them out. They are asked for all the time by readers of all ages. If He Hollers, Let Him Go, about racism during World War II. Things Fall Apart, Achibi's African trilogy about a young man trying to return to his tribal community. Kindred, Octavia Butler. This is sort of a slave narrative mixed with time travel. The Women of Brewster Place, Gloria Naylor's debut novel about the resilience of black women. Dorothy West's The Wedding, one of the first books to explore the African-American middle class. Milk and My Coffee by Eric Jerome Dickey. This is an entertaining novel about an interracial romance. Invisible Life, about a young gay black man who's navigating life and love in Atlanta, and it's by Elin Harris. You have to wonder if the title, Invisible Life, has any sort of connection to Ralph Ellison's title of Invisible Man. Roots. This was the enormously popular and imaginative rendering of 4 generations of the author's family, from the slave era to the civil rights movement. And one we can talk a little more about called Waiting to Exhale by Terry McMillan. It's about the friendship between four middle-class 30-something black women in Phoenix on the lookout for the right man. What's important about this book is that it was a smash bestseller when it was published in 1992. No one expected it. Publishers at that point never thought there was a market for black writing, for black themes and characters. They didn't even think black people bought that many books. This shattered that thinking and made them realize that there was a market out there, a huge market. And once it was discovered, publishers craved getting them over to their side. So this is a significant book in terms of its story, of course, but also in terms of its impact on the publishing industry. We're going to go back to Toni Morrison for just a little bit. As you can see, here's a quote. If there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, you must be the one to write it. Two of her other books that are extremely popular are The Bluest Eye and Beloved. The Bluest Eye is a heart-rending novel about beauty and conformity, seen through the eyes of an 11-year-old black girl. Song of Solomon is an imaginative, poetic exploration of four generations of family. It actually features one of Morrison's rare male protagonists. Morrison's rich language and bold visions make her one of the most influential authors of the 20th century. And in 1993, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, the first African American to be so honored. It's also important to note her influence went beyond that of being a writer. As an editor at Random House Publishers in the 1960s, Morrison had championed many African American writers, helping to get their voices heard when other publishers ignored them. Two of century literary successors are Coleman Whitehead and Jasmine Ward. Whitehead is the author of The Underground Railroad and The Nickel Boys, both winners of the Pulitzer Prize, and the recently published Harlem Shuffle. Jasmine Ward has won the National Book Award for acclaimed works such as Salvage the Bones and Sing Unburied Sing, and her latest, Where the Line Bleeds. Her stories deal with Hurricane Katrina, poverty, families, and life in Mississippi. Since 2000, contemporary stories have been published that really reflect the modern black experience. They are diverse, they are full of characters that are different and unique. Race, family, gender, class, LGBTQ+, these are all themes in some of these newer books. They take place all over the world. The United States, the New South, Ghana, Jamaica, Nigeria, Europe, and they're well worth your time in reading. I won't talk about each one of them individually, but I'll just let you look here at the titles. A couple that are really excellent are The Sellout by Paul Beatty, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, White Teeth by Zadie Smith, An American Marriage by Tayari Jones, Welcome to Braggsville by T. Geronimo Johnson, and Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. But all these books are worth a look. I highly recommend them. African American writers have taken their voices from the margins to the mainstream, and there is no better illustration of that than the emergence of popular African American genre fiction. Genre writing is characterized by similarities in form, style, and subject matters, and gives writers the freedom to write in a variety of topics. It's a very popular genre in this country. The queens of African American romance are right here. Brenda Jackson, Beverly Jenkins, Rochelle Ehlers, and Alyssa Cole. Progressive genre that includes diverse characters and inclusivity. Octavia Butler is the first African American woman to publish a sci-fi fantasy story. Mystery and suspense, probably the most popular genre in the world. From old school hard-boiled detectives to legal procedurals to cozy mysteries. These are five of the best. Walter Mosley, known for his Easy Rollins series, he's always popular. Chester Himes, who wrote Cotton Comes to Harlem. Donald Goines, Never Die Alone. Terry Woods, she writes mysteries, suspense that fall into the thriller category as well. So she's a great read. And one of the newest additions to this genre is My Sister, the Serial Killer. This was released to great acclaim a couple of years ago. Don't forget short stories. These collections provide authors with an opportunity to explore writing styles that can underscore their versatility. Here are some of the best collections out there. Hue and Cry, How Long Till Black Future Month, Lot, Look for Me and I'll Be Gone, Gorilla My Love. Graphic novels burst into the scene in the 70s, and once libraries eventually started including them in their collections, readership soared. By their very nature, they feature work and a readership that is diverse, progressive, and inclusive. And here are 6 great examples of graphic novels. Historical fiction. Though African American writers cover all areas of history in their fiction, this is a significant part of the writing, sort of a Civil War 2.0 approach. These novels by contemporary African American writers address the impact of slavery and the Civil War, told from African Americans' perspectives. They have the great advantage of time and historical context, and they are profound and thoughtful stories. Jubilee was published 50 years ago, over 50 years ago, maybe one of the first African-American novels to deal with the Civil War realistically. The Known World by Edward P. Jones, Middle Passage by Charles Johnson, The Good Lord Bird by James McBride, and 2 interesting additions to this genre, which were both published in the last couple of years, The Sweetness of Water by Nathan Harris, and The Prophets by Robert Jones, Jr. What's interesting about both these books is, at their core, they explore forbidden romance between enslaved young men in the Deep South. These young men find solace and safety in each other. Very imaginative storytelling. LGBTQ plus voices are many and diverse and varied. Some of the most popular African American authors fall into this category. Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, Elin Harris. All of these books are worth a look. They take place all over the world with all different kinds of characters, all ages, races, genders. Just want to touch a little bit on another genre, urban fiction. You may have also heard it called street lit. Stories within this literary genre feature life in American cities with an emphasis on realism. Well, it's the most popular genre among African American readers. And Zane, the author on the top left, she is the most popular African American author in the country. While there are some authors who have been critical of urban fiction as a legitimate genre, it's seriously, and they don't think it's well written, it's important to know what this genre means to readers. This is a quote from Ashley Coleman, who with her husband is a very popular urban fiction writer. They were writing our reality. They were writing about characters that looked like us, thought like us, that hustled the way that we did. I had never read about girls who thought like I did. This is very important. It's important to see yourself in a book, to see someone like you as a character. Just a quick discussion of cultural movements of the 20th century, two of the most important. The Harlem Renaissance from the 20s through the 30s, a period of unequaled cultural proliferation that began in New York's Harlem community. The movement was key to developing a new sense of identity as poets and writers began adding to various artistic forms and the culture. As you can see, some of these authors are many who we've already discussed. The Black Arts Movement from the 60s to the mid-70s. These artists engage in cultural nation building by sponsoring poetry readings, creating literary magazines, and setting up small presses. Many called it the cultural arm of the Black Power movement. And here are some of the authors that, again, we've discussed already, some we haven't. Drama, a very important literary genre. Writers and characters on the stage can provide authors with a voice, and the sense of immediacy in the theater can resonate with audiences, sometimes in ways that prose cannot. These are three of the most influential plays of the 20th century. A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry, about a black family in Chicago who experienced racism and segregation. This was the first Broadway play to be performed, one written by an African-American woman. For colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, by Ntozake Shange. She called this a choreo poem. It features prose, poetry, and dance, all part of a celebration of the lives of women of color. A Soldier's Play by Charles Fuller. This is set in U.S. Army base in the segregation-era South, and it follows the murder investigation of a sergeant in an all-black unit. Poetry. If you're going to talk about African-American poetry, this is what you start with. Being Brought from Africa to America by Phyllis Wheatley. It was the first book by an African-American to be published. And this is a line from that very important poem. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. Here are five giants of 20th century poetry. Their insight into the human condition and exquisite use of language make them immensely readable. Langston Hughes and Claude McKay, they came right out of the Harlem Renaissance. Gwendolyn Brooks, she was the first African-American to win a Pulitzer Prize for her poetry. Maya Angelou, one of the most revered and widely read poets ever. And Audre Lorde, a self-described black lesbian mother warrior poet. Her work featured portraits of herself and a community of women. Here are some more poets that should be read. Each one of them has a distinct voice. Countee Cullen, Amiri Baraka. Many say he was sort of the one who started the Black Arts movement. Sonia Sanchez, Derek Walcott, Nikki Giovanni, Rita Dove, Tracy K. Smith, Jericho Brown. Jericho Brown won the Pulitzer Prize a couple of years ago, and he is a Georgia native, and he teaches at Emory University. And a poet who's getting a lot of press these days, and deservedly so, is Amanda Gorman. Her new book of poetry, Call Us What We Carry, has been released to great reviews and it's flying off the shelves. You may recall Amanda Gorman was the inaugural poet for Joe Biden's presidential inauguration. Good for her. Authors also tell us a lot that they don't get to see themselves in books when they're younger. And that's certainly not true anymore. Maya Angelou said if I were a young person today trying to gain a sense of myself in the world, I would do that by reading The Life-Giving Power of Literature. Jason Reynolds, an extremely popular young adult and teen writer, says, I'm writing all the books I wish I had when I was a kid. Young readers have so much to choose from now. From the old classics, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, and Sounder, to new, popular, important reads such as The Hate You Give, Crossover, and Ghost. I think a good place to end this presentation is with a quote from Jasmine Ward from a speech she gave called The Fire This Time, A New Generation Speaks About Race. I believe there is power in words, power in asserting our existence, our experience, our lives through words. Again, I'd like to thank you for joining us for our presentation of African American fiction, part of the library's Black History Month series of programs. If you'd like to know more about the authors I talked about and some of the other books they've written, and maybe some I couldn't include here, please feel free to email me, and I will be happy to supply you with a list. You can email me at mwoodard@gwinnettpl.org, and I look forward to hearing from you. And again, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great Black History Month.